It's good to see you, and I want to say hi to all of our campuses, those who are joining us online, those who are joining us at our campuses overseas. I am really having fun traveling each week to our different campuses and meeting different parts of our family. It's a whole lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to being at the rest of them in this series. If you take out your message notes, we're in a series on getting through what you're going through. This last week was birthday week in the Warren household. We had 3 family birthdays. Sunday morning is Amy's birthday, but earlier in the week we had Cole's birthday and Caleb's birthday. And so on Cole's birthday we went to a bounce house and had a whole lot of fun playing in the bounce house. And on Caleb's birthday we went to a trampoline club. You can imagine me on a trampoline. And so I was really getting into this, and all of a sudden Cassie comes up, she's 7 years old, she says, "Papa, I have something I want you to do with me." I said, "Okay, babe, I'm up for anything." So she grabs my hand and she takes me around to this balance beam jousting contest. So we put on the headgear, this is like American Gladiator, okay? Now, it's me versus a 7-year-old. I think this is gonna be pretty easy, okay? And so we get up on the balance beam, and it's over this giant pit filled with real squishy, super soft sponges. So if you fall off, it's no big deal. And so she's at one end of the balance beam, and she comes at me, she takes one swack, and I'm off. Okay, I'm off. So I fall into this pit, and then I think, okay, well, that was fun. And then I start to get out. But at my weight, those things just collapse. And they're up to about here. Okay, so it's a pit filled with these super soft sponges, and you're going like this, and you push down, and they just all push right back down. And I thought, I'm gonna die in this pit. I wanted to do a commercial. I've fallen, and I can't get out. And actually, I couldn't get out, literally, because there was nothing to step up on. And so finally, Josh and Amy grabbed my hands and pulled me out. Have you ever been in a pit you couldn't get out of? That's why we're doing this series. Because we all have pits, financial pits, emotional pits, relational pits. Sometimes life's just the pits. And some things you can't get around, and some things you can't get over. You can't go under. You can't climb out on your own. You just got to go through it. And sometimes you have to ask for help. Now, we're about 2/3 through this series. We're in week 4. We've got 3 more that we want to look at. But before we do, I want to go back and review kind of where we've been. Because we've been talking about the 6 different phases or 6 responses or reactions to when you have a major loss in your life. You lose your job. You lose your health. You lose your spouse. You lose a loved one to death. You lose credibility. Whatever. Everybody goes through losses in life, and we all have major losses in life. Now, these 6 phases that we've been looking at, shock and sorrow and struggle so far, and we're going to look at surrender, sanctification, and service, they're not really linear. In other words, it's not like you go through one and then that's it, and then you're done. You can actually bounce back and forth between these stages. In fact, you could have all 6 of them in one day. And you could get through shock and be going through sorrow and come out on struggle, and then all of a sudden you find yourself back in sorrow again. That's normal. These are not linear like what you graduate from them. In a grieving period, you go through them all in different ways. So let's just review this. First, we said the typical reaction when you have a major loss in life is shock. And in shock, you feel numb. And we talked in that message about crying out to God and letting others help me. And we talked about how really you need other people in your life. You need fellowship when you're shocked because you can't think straight, and other people need to think for you. And you can't pray straight. You need other people to pray for you. And you can't even believe straight when you're in shock. You need other people to believe for you. And so we're in shock. Then you move into the sorrow phase. And in sorrow, you move from feeling numb to feeling grief. And remember, we talked about how grief is a good thing. Grief is God's way of getting us through the transitions of life. That there is no life without change. There is no change without loss. There is no loss without pain. And there is no pain without grief. Grief is healthy. In fact, to not grieve is unhealthy. In fact, grief is the only thing that makes you different from the animals. It's the most human emotion. God grieves. It's not a sin to grieve. Jesus wept. We talked about that you cannot go around grief. You got to go through it. And the reason why so many people have so many problems in adulthood is because they have never grieved over losses early on in life. They just stuffed it. And whenever you stuff your grief, you're the one who's going to get sick. You're the one who is going to come out sideways with all kinds of bizarre behaviors and things like that. You have to face it to move on. We talked about how men, we're not particularly good at grieving because we don't like to feel our emotions. In fact, we're often afraid of our emotions. And so we stuff them. We don't want to deal with it. When you stuff it, your stomach keeps score. The only way to get through it is to go through it. And you can't stuff it, you can't deny it. Remember, we talked about listing the losses that you've never grieved. There's some things that you went, and a lot of grief is more than just losing a loved one. You can lose a lot of things in life. You can lose your identity, you can lose your credibility, you can lose your health, you can lose a position. And then you identify what you really lost, and then you ask Jesus to heal your broken heart. Then last week we talked about struggle. And if in sorrow you feel, in shock you feel numb, and in sorrow you feel sad, in struggle you feel angry. And now you're starting to get frustrated, you're starting to get ticked off at God. You're getting a little angry at God. You go, why is this happening? That's the why questions of life. And remember I talked last week about how you have to learn how to what the Bible calls lament. I gave you a little acrostic: care, complain, appeal, remind, express. You got to complain, tell God what I think is unfair, and then appeal to God's nature. You're a good God, you're a loving God, help me out here. And you got to remind God of what He said. God loves to be reminded of His promises. And then I express my total trust in God. Now this week, we're going to look at surrender. And if the emotion best described it with surrender is peace. It's the pathway to peace. Remember last week I finished the message by saying the only way you're going to win a fight with God is surrender. But when you do, you win. Because God pours out blessings on you in that surrendered attitude. Now specifically, what I want us to look at this week in surrendering and the path of peace, of how do you let go of the pain in your life? How do you get on? How do you move through it? How do you get past the pain so you don't get stuck? Because so many people are stuck at some point in major loss. They had a divorce, and that's defined their life. Now everybody's going to have bad things happen to them. Everybody does. Everybody does. And you have 3 choices when bad things happen to you. You can let it destroy you. You can let it define you, or you can let it develop you. You can let it destroy you. You can let it define you, or you can let it develop you. What Kay and I want to share with you this weekend is how you let even the bad things in your life develop you and grow you by the act of surrender. Specifically, we're going to look at a passage where David, King David in the Bible, lost his son. He had a baby that died. Now, the Bible says, look there on your outline, Romans 15, verse 4, everything written in the Scriptures was written to teach us in order that we might have hope. Circle that word hope. The Bible says that everything God gave us in the Bible was given for our encouragement and for our hope. And so these stories that are in the Bible, they're not just there for stories. This story of David losing a child is not just a story. It teaches us the principles of the path to peace through surrender. Now, I don't know what losses you've had, and I don't know what the losses that are going to come in your life or in my life either, but you're going to need to know how to respond to them. So let's look at David and the story of him losing a child and then what he learned to do as a result of it. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 16 to 24, it says this. David begged God to spare the child. Now, let me just say it. Bathsheba was pregnant, the baby was born, and then the baby gets very, very sick. And it is near death, and David is freaking out. And like any new dad, he is on the floor praying and crying and weeping. And it says David begged God to spare the child. He went without food. In other words, he's fasting. And he lay all night on the bare ground. He's praying to God. Now, the leaders of the nation, remember David is the king of Israel, the leaders of the nation pleaded with David to get up and to go eat something, eat with them, but he refused. Then, on the seventh day, the baby died. So this has been going on for days and days. No food, no eating, just praying. On the seventh day, the baby died. Now, David's advisors were afraid to tell him. He was so broken up about the baby being sick, they said, what's he going to do? What's he going to do to himself when he tell him that the child is dead? So they're worried about it. But when David saw them whispering, he realized what had happened. Is the baby dead, he asked? And yes, they replied. Now, that's the setup of the story. And the rest of the story that Kay and I are going to share with you are the 6 things that David does after he has a major loss. He's been praying all of his life for this baby to be well, but the baby dies. I told you that I prayed every day of Matthew's life for 27 years that God would heal him of his mental illness, and it didn't happen. It was the #1 prayer of my life, and it didn't happen. Now, what does David do after this? Is he going to let it destroy him? Is he going to let it define him? Or is he going to let it develop him? David does 6 things. If you ever needed to take notes, it's this weekend. Write these down. The first thing I need to do if I want to get on the pathway to peace is this: accept what cannot be changed. That's the first thing I have to do on the path to peace. That's the first step in surrender. I have to accept what cannot be changed. You know, when people receive bad news, what's the first response to it? I don't believe it. Exactly. I don't believe it. We reject it. In fact, usually if you tell somebody some really bad, shocking news, here's what they'll start doing. They'll go like this. No, it can't be. I don't believe it. It couldn't be. It's impossible. It's not real, because our minds reject shocking news. And the first reaction is, no, it can't happen. It's not supposed to happen like this. That's the first typical reaction. But slowly, reality starts to set in, and you can't deny it anymore. And that's where surrender comes in. Surrender is accepting of reality. Here's what David did. Look there in your outline. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 22 and 23. David said this: I fasted and I wept while the child was alive, for I thought perhaps the Lord would be gracious and let the child live. But why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? The answer is no. What is David doing here? He's accepting what cannot be changed. And when you have an immediate loss, like when I had a son who a few hours earlier he was alive and then all of a sudden he was dead. And that was so shocking. It wasn't like a 6-month cancer where you get a chance to prepare for it. It seemed so surreal in those early hours because all of a sudden he was not there anymore. And really for the first couple weeks I kept expecting him to walk in the door at night. Now, when I say accepting what can't be changed, in whatever loss you've had in your life, no matter what the loss is, the first thing you have to do is, if it's over, it's over. And you accept what cannot be changed. Now, acceptance doesn't mean you stop caring. No. And acceptance doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It does. And acceptance doesn't mean you even think that what happened is good. It's not. None of that's acceptance. Acceptance simply means I can't change it. David said, my son has died, and I can't change that. I want you to write this question on your outline. What do I need to accept that's over in my life? What do I need to accept is over in my life? Maybe it's that job, and you keep thinking, maybe they're going to call me back and give me another chance. And I made a big mistake. I blew it. I really messed up. I really made a big mess of it. It's over. There ain't going to be another chance. Maybe it's some relationship that's over. And you just keep hoping they're coming back, and you keep hoping they're going to come back. You keep hoping they're going to call. They're not coming back. It's over. Maybe you need to say, what I need to accept is that season of my life is over. You know, I one time went to a high school reunion. I will never go again. Because there were some people still reliving the high school catch they made in a football game. I'm going, get a life. That happened 20 years ago. I mean, you're not in high school anymore. Have you looked in the mirror? That season of your life is never coming back. It's over. And you need to accept what cannot be changed. And the past in your life, for good or bad, the good things and the bad things, they are seasonal, and they're not there. And the past is past. And some of you, you've had a dream, and it didn't happen. And it's over. You need to get a new dream. You need to get a new vision. You need to get a new goal for your life. That's the first step. Accept what can't be changed. The second, and Kay's going to come and talk about this, is remember, it's not the end of the story.
It's not the end of the story. It's the second step to finding peace through surrender. When we experience a devastating or catastrophic loss of some kind, it's really normal to feel like this is the end. This is over. Nothing good can ever come from it. Everything is lost. King David, as he experienced the loss of his son, he was able to focus on the hope that was ahead of him, believing that God wasn't finished. 2 Samuel 12:23, he says about his son, I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me. He understood and accepted that his son would never be with him again on this earth, but he was confident that he would be reunited with his child, that his son was not going to come to him, but he was going to go to his child, and that the baby's death was not the end of the story. I told you a few weeks ago when I spoke that I know that Matthew's death is not the end of his story, it's not the end of our family's story, but that doesn't mean that there aren't moments that I don't doubt, because I do. Matthew is in heaven, but I can't see heaven. I can stare out at the sky and I can stare as hard as I can, and I can look and try to penetrate the veil of this existence to catch a glimpse of heaven, and I can't. I simply cannot do it. And what I'm learning to say is this: Lord, I believe. help my unbelief. And if you will be honest about your own walk with God, there have got to be those moments in which you would say that same thing. God, I believe, I do, I believe. But there are still these doubts. There are these things that I can't see, things that are mysterious, things that I don't know what to do with. And so we just end that prayer with, God, help my unbelief. There's nothing wrong with praying a prayer like that. See, God never is content to let a single one of our stories end in ashes. He promises that he will bring beauty from ashes. Where I struggle is sometimes believing not that he will bring beauty from ashes, but how. How will he bring beauty from these ashes? Because I am completely and utterly convinced that he will not let our story end with just ashes. I told you about the hope box that I had all the years that Matthew was ill, and that I believed, and how I stuffed it full of verses that I was clinging to, that God was going to heal Matthew, and then God didn't heal Matthew. And I told you that what I had now, besides rebuilding this hope box, is I had a mental picture of a little pot that I was collecting, and I called it the mystery pot, and I was putting all the things that I don't know what to do with in that pot. Well, I have a friend who knows that I'm very literal, and I now have a little mystery pot, if you will, and this little pot has questions. It has questions, and every time I think of another question that I don't know how to answer, that I don't know the answer to, that I can't figure out, it goes in the pot, and it sits on my devotional table, and it sits there as a reminder of this is real stuff that I'm dealing with. The questions that you have about faith and about the losses in your life, they are real questions. And so if you do something like this, a little pot or something else, but the point of it for me as I look at it is not that I have questions that I can't answer. The point of this is to remind me that God will not let ashes be the end of the story. In grief, one of the most challenging transitions I'm discovering is moving toward the future rather than hanging around in the past. That's a really challenging thing for me. Jerry Sitzer, who wrote a book that I recommended to you, A Grace Disguised, that we have in the pavilion, he lost his mother, his wife, and his 4-year-old daughter in a car accident. And he wrote this incredible book. And he says, when talking about how do we move into the future, he says this: how could I conceive of a future without them? The very thought was abhorrent to me. Whenever I thought of the future, I still found them there. But they were never going to be there, which only made me more aware of how devastating my loss was. I remembered a past that included people I did not want to give up. And I imagined a future that excluded people I desperately wanted to keep. And I find this very true. When we think of the past, our loved one is in it. Every time you think of the past, that person you've lost is in your past. They were there. They were such an integral part of it. And it's so impossible in these early stages, at least for us, to envision a future in which our loved one isn't there. And so what we do, if we're not careful, is we get stuck in the present. We get stuck here in this limbo land because we don't want to leave the past because that's where the loved one was, and we can't envision a future in which they're not there. We're disbelieving that they won't, and so we stay in this very uncomfortable limbo land of the present. And some of you would probably agree with me that a little nagging sense of guilt can creep in. It's been 4.5 months. I'm breathing again. But when you think of going into a future without the one that you love, there's a little bit of a sense of, if I move into a future, am I forgetting him? Am I neglecting him? And if any of you have been in any of that situation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a very common response in grief, or guilt, or denial, or deep sorrow. I don't want a future in which my loved one isn't a part. So how does surrender help us find peace in this grief as we think about a future, as we, like David, understand that our loved one is not coming back, or that loss is not changing? How do we find peace in that? Sarah Young writes in a devotional book I love called Jesus Calling. She says this about the future. She says, your future looks uncertain and feels flimsy, even precarious. That is how it should be. Secret things belong to the Lord, and future things are secret things. When you try to figure out the future, you're grasping at things that are mine, Jesus says. This, like all forms of worry, is an act of rebellion, doubting my promises to care for you. Whenever you find yourself worrying about the future, Jesus says, repent and return to me, and I will show you the next step forward, and the one after that, and the one after that. Relax and enjoy the journey in my presence, trusting me to open up the way before you as you go. As you can tell, I'm not totally there yet, but I'm edging closer. The third step that we see from this story of how David handled the loss of his child is to take care of yourself. Now, that may sound like a strange one, but every single one of these steps is an important part of the process of experiencing the peace of God. 2 Samuel 12:20, it says, then David got up from the ground, washed himself, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. After his son died, King David, he got up from the ground where he'd been lying prostrate in grief. He put on lotions, he washed himself, and he changed his clothes. Those sound like rather ordinary activities. You know, you take a bath, you change clothes. That's what we do every day, right? Except for grief and loss have a way of removing the desire to even take care of yourself. When you're in deep grief, when you're in suffering, when you're in mourning, who cares what you wear? It doesn't matter. Who cares whether you took a shower today or how many days it's been since you brushed your teeth? Who cares what's happening on the news? The newspaper is meaningless. The ticker tape of world events don't matter at all. In fact, eating can sometimes be completely immaterial. Nothing tastes right. Or because nothing tastes right, you eat more and more, just trying to make something feel again and take that ache away. Sleep can become a challenge, either sleeping too much or not able to sleep night after night. And exercise sounds like the most ridiculous thing anybody could ever suggest to you. And this is all so understandable if you have been through this kind of grief. You know what I'm talking about, because shock has a way of paralyzing us. Sorrow has a way of overwhelming us. But King David gives us a concrete example of how we can gradually begin to respond. Because he had accepted what he couldn't change, he couldn't bring his child back to him, and because he knew it wasn't the end of the story, and that each day here was just one day closer to being reunited with his son, he was willing to live in the tension of both mourning and living. He was willing to stay in that place of the tension of mourning and grieving, and still deciding that he was going to live. And to live meant that he was going to have to take care of himself physically. So he got up from the ground. I love that picture because it tells me that when he got the news, he hit the ground. He hit the ground when he got the news that his baby had died. I understand that. I too hit the ground when I got the news. So he got up from the ground and he resumed taking a shower and combing his hair. A month or so after Matthew passed away, we were together as a family for a weekend, and that entire weekend, I did not shower. I don't think I changed clothes. I know I didn't brush my teeth. I didn't put on any makeup. And then when I went back to saw my older son Josh about 3 days later, I walked in the room and he says, Mom, you look really nice. And I said, it's amazing what personal hygiene can do for you, isn't it? Because I hadn't done it for a while. The point is this, that if we're going to go on living, if we're going to take care of ourselves, we have to make these symbolic, what David did, it was symbolic of his decision to go on living, to re-enter into life, to participate in life again. It's a tough place to be, but you and I have to learn to live, that we can simultaneously grieve and simultaneously live in this world at the same time. Which leads us to that next step of surrender, step 4, which is to refocus on God through worship, because God will help us do this, even as difficult as it seems. 2 Samuel 12:20 says, then he, talking about David, went to the tabernacle and he worshiped the Lord. Psalm 73, 16 to 17 says, I tried to understand all this, but it was too hard for me to see until I went to the temple of God. Because King David knew that worship can expand our spiritual insight and understanding, he headed straight for God's house in his grief. When he received that overwhelming news of the death of his child, this loss that had taken him to the ground, that laid him prostrate on the ground, he headed straight for God's house. It's because he knew that in worship, we begin to catch a glimpse of how God is moving and working in the losses, how he's working in our world, and how he's working in our lives when we come in humble surrender and adoration of him. See, the temptation in our grief is to turn away from God. It's to run from him. It's to go as far in the other direction as we can, because we figure in some way God is responsible. And so if he has allowed this to happen and we're mad and we're angry and we're shocked and we're heartbroken, we run. And all of those emotions are okay, but they're not long-term responses. Long-term, we have to figure out how to be in worship again. God will never abandon you in your anger. He will never abandon you in your grief. He will never abandon you in your tears. He will never abandon you in your doubts, ever. He will never. But those emotions have a way of clouding. They form a fog, if you will, a cloud that keeps us sometimes from receiving the spiritual insight and the comfort that God longs to give to us. And it's hard to recognize God's working when we're lashing out at him or when we're completely devastated by sorrow. So David went to God's house. He went to the tabernacle. But it's really not about the place, because as much as I love the worship center here at Lake Forest, it's not a cathedral, okay? Nobody comes here to admire the beautiful art in our worship center. I mean, it's a very functional place, and it's warm and it's comfortable and I love it, but let's be honest, it ain't no cathedral, okay? So we don't come here because it's beautiful. And if you are in one of our campuses, you use rented facilities, you don't even get to go there during the week, so it's certainly not about the place. What it is about this. The Bible talks about quietness and stillness. He talks about reconnecting all through the Word of God. So I'm advising you, what I've done for myself, what Rick and I have done, what our family has done, is to find places that are quiet, that are serene, that are tranquil, that would allow you to reconnect with God somewhere, I think, in the beauty of the world that God has created. In the past 4.5 months, we've been to the Redwoods at Big Sur. We've been to Yosemite. We've been to O'Neill Park. We've been to the beach. These are places where we've gone to intentionally connect with God. If I sit in my house, pretty soon all I can see are all the memories that break my heart. And I get tunnel vision, and I get claustrophobic, and grief threatens to just swallow me up. And so when I get outside and I see the world that God has made, and I see the majesty that he has used to make this world, it reinforces my faith and my belief in him. And I see that this God who designed this incredible beauty and maintains it all, is the God that is still in control, and I can trust him. Now, you can probably already tell that I'm a pretty visual person, and I like to use different objects in worship, because I really believe that using tangible objects, like a mystery box or a hope box, have a way of connecting us to the intangible. God is spirit, and we can't see him. And so sometimes with our faith, it's so helpful to have tangible things that help us in our worship. This is something that someone gave to me a few years ago. It's called the clinging cross, and it's very twisted and broken, and I love that. It's meant to fit here in the palm of your hand so that you can grasp tightly to this cross as you pray. And I have to tell you, in the last 4.5 months, I have clung to this cross in prayer so many times. I love the fact that it's twisted, because it reminds me of the twisted body, what Jesus went through as he gave himself up for me. It reminds me of the twisted nature of my grief and how I've been left broken. But as I bring my broken self to the cross where Jesus was broken, and in prayer, he and I talk and we commune, I find that I see spiritual insights that I don't see any other way. Another thing that I've done, some of you are going to start thinking I'm really weird, but, and that's probably true, but go with me on it, is I have taken a blanket, and I have wrapped myself up in a blanket along with the cross, because in my lowest moments, I needed just a safe place to be. And in your lowest moments, if you can envision, maybe you're not all about the tangible things, okay, fine, we're all different in the way that we connect with God, but for those of you who do, I urge you to try it. But just to consider this, be in a safe place. If it's God's house, if it's in nature, if it's with a group of people, where you feel safe to yell, to scream, to cry, to weep, to moan, to argue, to question. But know this, wrapped in his love, clinging to his cross, wrapped in his love, you are safe. And it is the place that you maybe can take those first stabs again at worshiping. Because grief has a way of keeping us from worshiping. We're too overwhelmed. But it's in worship that we connect with God and find that he comforts us. As I said, I'm just past the stage of where I can breathe. And now as I worship, maybe you're listening to this today because God is gently inviting you again to surrender your loss to him. A great Christian from hundreds of years ago said this: God is not a spy looking to surprise you. He is not an enemy lurking in the shadows to hurt you. God is your Father who loves you, and he wants to help you if you will but trust in his goodness. Rick's going to tell you the next point about surrendering.
Some of you may not know that Kay wrote a book on this, on the path to peace through surrender. It's called Dangerous Surrender, saying yes to God. And if you haven't read that book, I encourage you to read it. Now, there are 2 other steps on this path to peace that David did. He does these 6 things when he has this crisis in his life. You need to know these 6 things because you're going to have crises in your life. The 5th thing that David does is this: do something productive. In your grief, in your shock, in your sorrow, in your sadness, in your struggle, part of surrender is to do something productive. You see, when we're hit with an unexpected loss, what happens is we get paralyzed by it, and you get stuck, and often you can't even, you lose your job. Let's say if you went to work tomorrow and you go in and they give you a pink slip and say, you're done. How long have you served here? 10 years. Sorry, you're done. You're in shock because all of a sudden, boom, you don't have a job anymore, and you're paralyzed. You can't even think what to do. One of the things you need to do as you get to this stage is you start moving. You start maybe just a little tiny step, one small step at a time. The 5th step of David's recovery is 1 Samuel 12, verse 20. And he says this: after he'd done these other things, where he got up from the ground, he washed himself, he put on lotion, he changed his clothes, he goes to the tabernacle and the temple, and he worships. And says after that, he returned to the palace and ate. Now, I like that part. He returned to the palace and ate. Now, why does he go to the palace? Well, he's the king, duh. Okay, he's the king. The palace is his place of productivity. The palace is where he works. He's basically saying, I'm going to go back to work. Now, let me ask you this. This is just a day after this baby has died. Do you think David's over that grief? Of course not. You don't ever get over grief anyway. Remember, we said you don't get over it, you get through it. So is he still grieving? Yes. Is he still sad? Yes. Is he still in a whirlwind? Yes. I remember writing in my journal about a month ago, I don't have to stop mourning in order to start moving. You might write that down. I don't have to stop mourning in order to start moving. In other words, if I wait until I feel like moving, I'm not going to feel like it for a long, long time. And so this step of doing something productive, when you have had a major loss, you just broke up with your boyfriend, you had somebody just walk out of your life, you just had something happen to you that was catastrophic, you got the bad news that your friend or your neighbor has cancer. Something's happened to you. What you've got to do, at that point, you have to take a first step. I don't have to stop mourning to start moving, but it requires faith. 4 months ago, Paul Cunningham had a stroke. And he had a big loss in his life. He lost total feeling in half his body. That's a big loss. Watch this video.
Hi, my name's Paul Cunningham. I'm pastor of Westmore Community Church in Oklahoma City, and got a story to tell you. On April 18th, just a little over 4 months ago, I heard a popping sound. The left side of my body immediately went numb, and I have a pharmacy background, and so I told my wife that she needed to call the ambulance because I felt like I was having a stroke. The numbness began up my left side, continued on through my face and head, and I actually thought it was a good thing I called an ambulance because I didn't think I probably would make it that night. I spent the next week in intensive care, and then I made it through that, and then spent 5 weeks in a rehabilitation hospital. I couldn't walk. I couldn't feel my entire left side, and so I had to learn to walk again. I had to learn to use my left hand and my left arm again. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. But one of the scriptures that God gave me that was really powerful, that scared me through a lot of this, was 2 Corinthians 5:7. It says, "For we walk by faith and not by sight." And I began to say that. I began to pray that every day. That by faith I was going to walk out of that hospital. By faith I was going to preach again. By faith I was going to play golf again. And I just began to pray and believe that. Then the moment came that was really the powerful moment about faith for me. Even though I'd preached it and taught it for so many years, my therapist said, was teaching me how to walk. And at this time, after a few weeks, I was in a walker. And he goes, I'm going to start teaching you how to walk that walker. And I said, okay. And so the day came, he took the walker away. And he said, now start walking. And I didn't move. He said, what's wrong? I said, I'm afraid. He said, what are you afraid of? I said, I can't feel my leg. In fact, if I don't look at my leg, I don't even know it's there. And so I can't see it. I can't feel it. And you're telling me when I step out on it that it's going to hold me up. And he said the words to me I'll never forget. He said, trust it. And I said, what do you mean trust it? He said, you've been walking with the walker. Your brain's retrained itself. Trust it, that when you step out on that leg, it's going to step and it's going to hold you up. At that moment, I just felt like that's exactly what faith is all about. So that scripture, I walk by faith, not by sight, became so real and more powerful to me than it ever has before in my life. That's what we do. I can't feel my leg. That's the sight. I can't, if I don't look at it, I don't even know that it's there. But every time that I step out on it, it holds me up. It's like a relationship to God. And I found out that not only when I stepped out on it, it was there, but the more I stepped out on it, the more I could trust it. And again, I think that's so much like our faith. God lays on our hearts, to trust his promises. We step out on his promises. We can't see them. We can't feel them. But they're there. And they're there every time. And the more we do it, the more we trust it. And the more we believe it, and the more confident that we are. Today, I'm not walking without a walker. I'm playing 18 holes of golf every week. I'm back speaking 3 services every Sunday morning. But I still cannot feel anything on my entire left side of my body. So I still have to walk by faith and trust God by faith every step of the way. But I think that's what our relationship with God really is all about.
Where do you need to take a step of faith? Where do you need to take a baby step? What are you afraid to do? What do you know you should be doing, but you've been paralyzed and you haven't done it? I want to challenge you as your pastor, somebody who loves you. Take a step of faith. I want you today to say, I'm going to do it. I'm mourning, but I'm going to start moving. I am grieving, but I'm going to start growing. I am hurting, but I'm going to start healing. I am wounded, but I'm going to start walking. And I am sad, but I am going to step out. That is the path to peace. When you surrender your fear to God. Give God that thing you're afraid to do. Grief doesn't paralyze, fear does. There's one more step. The 6th thing David does is this. Keep on loving despite your pain. Keep on loving even in your pain. In spite of your pain, keep on loving. Now, why do I have to say this? Because when you get hurt, the natural reaction is to pull into a shell, build up giant walls around you, and say, I'm never going to let another man hurt me again. I'm never going to let another woman hurt me again. No way, Jose. That was too painful. And you pull in and you build walls and you build bridges. Yeah, there's a way to live without pain. Have no love in your life. Love equals pain. Sorry. Don't be afraid of that because the pain actually deepens your love. It makes you a more loving, not less, person when you let it deepen you. The pain that comes from deep love makes your love even more fruitful. When you lose somebody you love, whether it's they move away, they die, or they reject you, it's heartbreaking. It doesn't matter what causes it, it's heartbreaking. And don't build that wall around. You've got to keep on loving. What do you do when somebody rejects your love? You redirect it. You redirect it. Because there are a lot of people in the world who need your love. If you've always wanted to have children and you've been unable to have children, what do you do with that love? Just be bitter about it? No. There are 137 million orphans in the world who would love to be adopted. You redirect your love. And if somebody turns you off, rejects you, shuts you down, what do? There are plenty of people who need your love. You redirect it. So you keep on loving in your pain, and you look at what you've got left, not just what you've lost. This is what David did. He went back, and he loved his wife. 2 Samuel 12, verse 24, the 6th thing David did. David then, it's after worship, after all these other things, then David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and he slept with her. And she became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. And you know what happened to Solomon? He became the wisest man in the world, and the wealthiest man in the world, and eclipsed his father's kingdom. Solomon's kingdom was far greater than David's kingdom. Far, far greater. And because David did not just shut himself down and say, I'll never love again, I'm never going to be involved in anybody's life, I'm never going to reach out. No. The world was blessed because he gave his love. I read a quote from Mother Teresa this week. She said this, I found a paradox, that if you love until it hurts, then there can be no more hurt and only more love. Jesus knows what it's like to love in the middle of pain. It's called the cross. Jesus knows what it's like to keep on loving when you don't feel like loving. Jesus knows what it's like to keep on loving when you feel like your love is being rejected. He keeps on loving. 1 John 3:16, we know what real love is because Christ gave his life for us. In other words, he lost his life for us, so we have to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. This is the path to peace. It is the path of surrendering your pain, surrendering your hurt, surrendering your fears, surrendering the problem, surrendering everything that's in your life that's messing up. Say, God, I give it all to you. If you read my weekly news and views, you know that 2 weeks ago on Saturday night, a young mother in this area had decided that she'd had too many losses and she decided to take her life. She'd had too many losses and said, it's not worth living. And she took a handful of pills, and she took a bunch of alcohol, and she washed it down with the alcohol and lay down by her 1.5-year-old baby to die. In the morning, when she woke up, she was even more depressed that the suicide had not worked. And in her despair, she called her next door neighbor, who happened to go to Saddleback. And that friend, that neighbor, brought that Muslim woman to Saddleback a week ago Sunday, here at Lake Forest. She admitted that as a Muslim, she had never been in a Christian church, and that as a scientist, she had studied science and decided that science and religion didn't go together, which is one of the biggest myths out there. But she came and she heard me do a message on what do you do when your world is collapsing? And she heard about the hope that is in Christ. And she said, I want to know more. I need to hear more. And she felt hopeful for the first time. And she left the Sunday morning service, but that afternoon, Sunday afternoon, all those waves of depression and discouragement and loss and feeling alone all came back into her life. So you know what she did? She came back to the Sunday night service. And when she walked in that door, she said to an usher, I need to talk to somebody. And two of our members talked to her and lovingly led her to surrender her life to Jesus Christ. She came back the next week, last week, took class 101, made 7 new friends in the membership class, and all 7 friends that afternoon came and watched her be baptized. That is what happens when you have hope in your life. I don't know what you're going through. I hope it's not something major right now. But whether it is or it isn't, you will go through these kind of things in your life, and you need to be ready to walk the path of peace, which is surrender. I surrender control. I surrender to your care. I surrender to your love. I surrender the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've all heard the serenity prayer, but most people have never heard the whole prayer. We know the first part goes like this. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's where it ends for most people. They think that's all they know. Let me read you the rest of the prayer. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace. That's what we're talking about. Taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. That's accepting things that can be changed. Trusting in your will, that you will make it all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. That's the rest of the prayer. Let's bow our heads. If you've never opened your life to Jesus Christ, you need to surrender to him today. Whatever discouragement, whatever depression, whatever fatigue, failure, frustration, or fear you have, you need to dump it on God right now. The Bible says, cast all your cares on him, for he cares for you. Say, Jesus Christ, just say this in your heart. Jesus Christ, as much as I know how, I open my life to you, and I surrender the good, the bad, and the ugly in my life. I surrender my fears. Jesus, I surrender my flaws. Jesus, I surrender my failures. Jesus, I surrender my frustrations. I surrender my faults. I give you every area of my life. I surrender my past. I surrender my future. And I surrender this moment. And I want to walk the path of peace with you. And I pray this in your name. Amen. Well, hello, everybody. It's good to see you, and I want to say hi to all of our campuses, those who are joining us online, those who are joining us at our campuses overseas. I am really having fun traveling each week to our different campuses and meeting different parts of our family. It's a whole lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to being at the rest of them in this series. If you take out your message notes, we're in a series on getting through what you're going through. This last week was birthday week in the Warren household. We had 3 family birthdays. Sunday morning is Amy's birthday, but earlier in the week we had Cole's birthday and Caleb's birthday. And so on Cole's birthday we went to a bounce house and had a whole lot of fun playing in the bounce house. And on Caleb's birthday we went to a trampoline club. You can imagine me on a trampoline. And so I was really getting into this, and all of a sudden Cassie comes up. She's 7 years old. She says, "Papa, I have something I want you to do with me." I said, "Okay, babe, I'm up for anything." So she grabs my hand and she takes me around to this balance beam jousting contest. So we put on the headgear. This is like American Gladiator. Okay, now it's me versus a 7-year-old. I think this is gonna be pretty easy, okay? And so we get up on the balance beam, and it's over this giant pit filled with real squishy, super soft sponges. So if you fall off, it's no big deal. So she's at one end of the balance beam, and she comes at me. She takes one swack, and I'm off. Okay, I'm off. So I fall into this pit, and then I think, okay, well, that was fun. And then I start to get out. But at my weight, those things just collapse. They're up to about here. Okay, so it's a pit filled with these super soft sponges, and you're going like this, and you push down, and they just all push right back down. And I thought, I'm gonna die in this pit. I wanted to do a commercial. I've fallen, and I can't get out. And actually, I couldn't get out, because there was nothing to step up on. And so finally, Josh and Amy grabbed my hands and pulled me out. Have you ever been in a pit you couldn't get out of? That's why we're doing this series. Because we all have pits, financial pits, emotional pits, relational pits. Sometimes life's just the pits. And some things you can't get around, and some things you can't get over. You can't go under. You can't climb out on your own. You just got to go through it. And sometimes you have to ask for help. Now, we're about 2/3 through this series. We're in week 4. We've got 3 more that we want to look at. But before we do, I want to go back and review kind of where we've been. Because we've been talking about the 6 different phases or 6 responses or reactions to when you have a major loss in your life. You lose your job. You lose your health. You lose your spouse. You lose a loved one to death. You lose credibility. Whatever. And everybody goes through losses in life, and we all have major losses in life. Now, these 6 phases that we've been looking at, shock and sorrow and struggle so far, and we're going to look at surrender, sanctification, and service, they're not really linear. In other words, it's not like you go through one and then that's it, and then you're done. You can actually bounce back and forth between these stages. In fact, you could have all 6 of them in one day. And you could get through shock and be going through sorrow and come out on struggle, and then all of a sudden you find yourself back in sorrow again. That's normal. These are not linear like when you graduate from them. In a grieving period, you go through them all in different ways. So let's just review this. First, we said the typical reaction when you have a major loss in life is shock. And in shock, you feel numb. And we talked in that message about crying out to God and letting others help me. And we talked about how really you need other people in your life. You need fellowship when you're shocked because you can't think straight, and other people need to think for you. And you can't pray straight. You need other people to pray for you. And you can't even believe straight when you're in shock. You need other people to believe for you. And so we're in shock. Then you move into the sorrow phase. And in sorrow, you move from feeling numb to feeling grief. And remember, we talked about how grief is a good thing. Grief is God's way of getting us through the transitions of life. That there is no life without change. There is no change without loss. There is no loss without pain. And there is no pain without grief. Grief is healthy. In fact, to not grieve is unhealthy. In fact, grief is the only thing that makes you different from the animals. It's the most human emotion. God grieves. It's not a sin to grieve. Jesus wept. We talked about that you cannot go around grief. You got to go through it. And the reason why so many people have so many problems in adulthood is because they have never grieved over losses early on in life. They just stuffed it. And whenever you stuff your grief, you're the one who's going to get sick. You're the one who is going to come out sideways with all kinds of bizarre behaviors and things like that. You have to face it to move on. We talked about how men, we're not particularly good at grieving because we don't like to feel our emotions. In fact, we're often afraid of our emotions. And so we stuff them. We don't want to deal with it. When you stuff it, your stomach keeps score. The only way to get through it is to go through it. And you can't stuff it, you can't deny it. Remember, we talked about listing the losses that you've never grieved. There's some things that you went, and a lot of grief is more than just losing a loved one. You can lose a lot of things in life. You can lose your identity, you can lose your credibility, you can lose your health, you can lose a position. And then you identify what you really lost, and then you ask Jesus to heal your broken heart.